Welcome back to the deep dive. We are looking at the stack of notes and research you provided on the book of Joel. And we are officially in part 4 of our 5-session journey through this incredibly dense prophetic material.
Yeah, we really are. It's a lot to unpack.
It is a lot. And if you're just jumping into your research now, don't worry. We are going to ground you in the context. We're analyzing these ancient texts to pull out the structural frameworks they present.
Right, treating the material with the analytical depth your notes demand. The landscape of Joel is undeniably complex. Every session we've done builds directly on the last.
Yeah.
Because it's a text that requires careful attention. The author is laying down a theological architecture that later biblical writers constantly borrow from and, expand upon.
So let's do a quick recap of session 3 to anchor us before we move forward. Last time, we looked at how your sources connect the Old Testament prophecies of Joel to the New Testament events of Pentecost.
Exactly. The text in the book of Acts claims the Holy Spirit was poured out just as Joel prophesied in chapter 2.
But the major analytical hurdle we hit there was the concept of a partial fulfillment. I mean, the Spirit was given, but the massive cosmic phenomena Joel talked about in that same breath.
The sun turning dark, the moon turning to blood.
Right. Those things did not happen in the first century.
Which introduced that critical framework for reading these specific texts, the concept your notes refer to as telescoping.
Telescope analogy, yeah. The idea that a prophet looks through the lens of their current time and sees a near historical event.
Like the devastating locust plague that hit Judah.
Right. And uses that immediate crisis to point toward a massive ultimate future event. It's like looking at a mountain range from a great distance.
Yeah.
You see two peaks that look like they are right next to each other, almost touching.
But when you actually travel to that mountain range, you realize there is a massive valley.
This vast expanse of time.
Exactly, separating those two peaks. According to the framework you provided, Joel's prophecies telescope from his immediate historical reality all the way to a proposed end of human history.
Encompassing events like the Jewish rejection of Jesus and the subsequent offering of the kingdom to the Gentiles.
That telescoping mechanism is essential for parsing the timeline in your research. The immediate historical crisis is treated as a literal reality, but the text simultaneously positions it as a prototype.
It's a smaller scale model.
Yeah, a model of a much larger ultimate reality that the author anticipates.
Which brings us directly to our focus for today's deep dive. We are stepping into that ultimate reality. Your notes label this as the day of the Lord.
Yes.
And as we parse this material, we have 2 core questions driving our analysis today, based on the themes in your research. First, how do the texts suggest believers should live in practical awareness of God's ultimate timing?
Right.
And second, why does the narrative present a God who chooses to hide the timing of some major events, keeping them a secret, while vividly revealing others to the entire world?
If we connect this to the bigger picture of your research, today is really about reconciling what looks, on the surface, like a massive structural contradiction.
Oh, it definitely looks like a contradiction.
A massive one between the Old Testament and the New Testament source texts. We need to analyze how different biblical authors across centuries describe the exact same timeline, but from seemingly opposing, irreconcilable perspectives.
Okay, let's unpack this contradiction. We established that since the sun didn't go dark and the moon didn't turn to blood at Pentecost, those terrifying cosmic signs are positioned in your sources as future events.
Right.
Let's look at the central scripture you highlighted for today. This is Joel chapter 2, verses 30 and 31, from the New American Standard Bible.
Go ahead.
The text reads, "I will display wonders in the sky and on the earth, blood, fire, and columns of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and awesome day of the Lord comes."
The critical word in that entire passage, for the sake of our timeline analysis, is before.
Before.
If you look at the sequence the author lays out, the sun turns to darkness and the moon turns to blood before the great and awesome day of the Lord arrives. In this framework, these terrifying signs are not the day of the Lord itself. They function as a divine warning signal. They are the atmospheric alarms ringing right before the period erupts in absolute judgment.
That sequence completely shifts the reading of the text. It positions the cosmic disturbances not as the judgment itself, but as the precursor to it.
And to truly understand the scale of this sequence, your notes synthesize 3 distinct passages of scripture from different eras that all describe this exact same cosmic event.
But wait, before we connect those dots, if Joel and, say, the Apostle John are writing centuries apart, How do the sources confidently conclude they are talking about the exact same cosmic event?
That's a good question.
Like, how do we know they aren't just using similar poetic language or common apocalyptic metaphors?
That is a very fair, critical question. The argument in your research relies on the specificity and the sequence of the celestial mechanics described.
The sequence.
Right. It isn't just a generic bad day, it's a highly specific combination. You have a darkened sun coupled with a blood-red moon, followed immediately by global structural upheaval.
I see.
The later writers aren't just borrowing the imagery, they're explicitly referencing Joel's timeline to validate their own prophetic claims.
Let's test that synthesis then. Walk us through the three passages.
First, we have the foundation you just read, Joel 2.3031. The sun is darkened, the moon is like blood, and Joel explicitly places this before the day of the Lord.
Right.
Now, the notes move forward hundreds of years to the Gospel of Matthew. In Matthew 24.29, the text records Jesus speaking to his disciples. The claim there is that after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened and the moon will not give its light.
So Joel says the signs happen before the day of the Lord.
Yes.
The text in Matthew says they happen after a period called the tribulation.
Exactly. Now let's add the third textual piece, the book of Revelation, chapter 6.
Yeah.
The author, John, is describing a vision of the sixth seal being opened. The imagery is remarkably consistent. The sun becomes black as sackcloth. The whole moon becomes like blood.
Wow.
In the framework of biblical prophecy you've provided, Joel, Matthew, and John are all targeting the same specific juncture in this future timeline.
The parallels in the imagery are definitely striking.
Yeah.
But how does the narrative describe the human reaction to this? Because this directly ties into our first focus for today, living in awareness.
It does.
If the sky literally turns black and the moon looks like blood, the psychological reaction on Earth, according to these texts, must be absolute chaos.
The reaction described in the text is one of sheer unmitigated terror. In Revelation 6, verses 15 through 17, the author details the response of the unbelieving world. It lists kings, commanders, the rich, the strong, every slave and free man. It says they hide themselves in caves and among the rocks of the mountains.
Just hiding in sheer panic.
And they cry out to the mountains, "Fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb, for the great day of their wrath has come."
For the great day of their wrath has come. The text indicates that the population knows exactly what is happening.
Exactly.
It isn't perceived as an ecological disaster. It's perceived as divine retribution.
Notice the grammatical phrasing in your notes. The text does not say, "the day of wrath is coming." It says, "it has come."
Has come, past tense.
Well, present perfect, signaling the definitive arrival of the period. The cosmic signs have acted as the final, undeniable warning, and humanity recognizes that the promised judgment is now upon them.
But the notes also draw sharp contrast with how believers are meant to react to these same events. Addressing that first focus question about awareness, according to the theological framework here, a believer is not supposed to be hiding in a cave in terror.
No, not at all.
The text suggests they are meant to discern these signs. Living in awareness of this ultimate timing means recognizing these cosmic events not as random, terrifying anomalies in the universe, but as a sovereign, highly structured plan unfolding.
That's a great way to put it.
It's akin to the difference between being caught in a violent storm blindly versus sitting in a meteorology lab watching the weather radar.
Yeah.
You know exactly what the storm is, what its track is, and who ultimately controls it.
That distinction is central to the theology of the sources. For the unbelieving world in the text, these signs induce a panic of finality. For the believer, your notes argue that the signs are meant to validate the absolute truth of the scriptural promises and the sovereignty of the divine author over human history.
And transforms terror into validation,
Yes.
which is a compelling internal logic for the text. But here's where it gets really interesting, because this is where we hit a massive structural speed bump in your research.
Paradox.
Right. We just outlined this airtight case that the day of the Lord is preceded by massive, undeniable, visible cosmic signs. The sun goes black. The moon turns to blood. The stars fall. It is the loudest, most visually arresting warning system imaginable.
It's unmissable.
Exactly. But then we look at other New Testament texts, and they seem to say the exact opposite.
This is the central paradox your notes highlight for today's session.
I'm going to read 1 Thessalonians 5.2. The Apostle Paul writes, "For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night."
And your research points out that Peter says the exact same thing in 2 Peter 3.10. The day of the Lord will come like a thief.
It's like comparing a cat burglar to Godzilla. They represent two completely different threat levels and modes of operation.
They really do.
A thief does not announce his arrival by turning the moon to blood or causing stars to fall. He sneaks in quietly when everyone is asleep and unsuspecting.
Which forces us to address your second focus for today. Why does the text contain this apparent contradiction? Why present a narrative where God hides the start of this event, sneaking into history like a thief, but then reveals the climax with the most massive cosmic fireworks display imaginable?
It reads like the authors are describing two completely different events. How do the sources you provided reconcile this?
The reconciliation in your notes requires a shift in how we define the terminology. The common assumption is that the day of the Lord is a single, literal, 24-hour solar day.
A singular moment in time.
Right. But the theological framework here argues that it is not. The day of the Lord is presented as an extended period or an epoch of divine intervention in history.
An extended period. Okay, let's map that out. Can you provide the scriptural backing from the notes that justifies reading it as an era rather than a single day?
The key is in the grammar of 2 Peter 3.9, the verse you just mentioned.
Okay.
The text reads, "The day of the Lord will come like a thief, in which the heavens will pass away with a roar."
In which?
The critical phrase there is "in which." The text states this period arrives like a thief, but in which meaning contained within this broader time frame, the heavens eventually pass away.
I see.
This grammatical structure proves the authors viewed it as a period containing multiple sequential events. It encompasses a series of judgments, a promised reign, and eventually the destruction of the present heavens and earth.
To make sure we are really grasping this, let's try an analogy. It sounds like the text treats the day of the Lord similarly to how historians treat World War II.
That's a helpful comparison.
When someone says World War II, they aren't talking about a single 24-hour Tuesday. They're talking about a massive multi-year epoch. It has a quiet, deceptive buildup. It escalates through a series of distinct, horrific battles, and it culminates in a definitive, undeniable climax. Is that an accurate way to map the timeline your notes are presenting?
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. The scriptures are providing two different perspectives on this singular extended timeline. First, you have the unexpected beginning. This is the hidden aspect.
Like the thief.
Exactly. The day of the Lord begins suddenly and unexpectedly, sneaking into human history like a thief. Now, your notes connect this hidden beginning to an event called the Rapture of the Church.
Hold on. Your notes mention the rapture of the church and tribulation judgments heavily in this section. For the sake of the material we're reviewing, let's define exactly how these sources are differentiating those events from the final judgment, because those are loaded theological terms.
They are. In the framework of your sources, the rapture refers to a sudden, hidden removal of believers from the earth, which triggers the beginning of this extended Day of the Lord period.
Okay.
The texts argue that God intentionally hides the exact timing of this trigger event. The narrative quotes Jesus, stating that no one knows the day or the hour of this beginning.
And what's the reason given for that?
The theological reason given for this hiddenness is to emphasize surprise and to cultivate a state of constant watchfulness and readiness among believers.
So the argument is that God hides the start of the timeline specifically to cultivate faithfulness and anticipation rather than complacency.
Correct. But then, as you progress further down that extended timeline, the text outlines a period of tribulation judgments, a series of escalating global crises.
That's the World War II escalation phase in our analogy.
Exactly. And after those unfold, you reach the climactic intervention. This is the revealed aspect. Later in that epoch, the narrative depicts Christ preparing to visibly intervene. And that is when the text says God reveals his hand vividly.
The darkened sun and the blood moon.
Right. They are utilized to manifest ultimate power and signal to the surviving population that the climax of the period has arrived.
A hidden start to ensure watchfulness and a revealed climax to demonstrate absolute authority. When you map it out as an extended epoch, the contradiction dissolves.
It does.
The thief and the cosmic signs are just different phases of the same historical period. And that brings us to the climax itself, what your notes specifically label the day of the Lord proper.
The culmination of the entire epoch.
Right. If this whole thing is an extended period like World War II, the day of the Lord proper is essentially the D-Day or the VE Day of this prophetic timeline. It's the specific visible descent of Christ in judgment.
Exactly. And this is the specific phase that the book of Joel focuses on so heavily. The author of Joel isn't particularly concerned with the hidden, thief-like beginning. His prophetic lens is zoomed entirely in on the dramatic, earth-shaking climax.
Let's look at how Joel describes that climax. This is Joel 3.16. The Lord roars from Zion, and utters his voice from Jerusalem. Let's just contrast the literary devices the authors are using here. A Thu sneaks around in the dark, trying to avoid detection at all costs.
A lion roaring from the capital city is the exact opposite.
Exactly. It is a declaration of presence, dominance, and inescapable power.
It is a terrifying, majestic image within the text, and Joel provides specific geographical and historical context for this roar. According to Joel 3.2, the narrative states, "I will gather all the nations and bring them down to the valley of Jehoshaphat. Then I will enter into judgment with them there."
So the text outlines a scenario where God draws the military forces of the world into a highly specific geographic location for a final confrontation.
Yes.
Let's dwell on that detail for a second, because the Valley of Jehoshaphat isn't a term people use every day. Looking at your research, what is the significance of this specific valley? Is it purely geographical, or is the text doing something symbolic here?
It is functioning on both levels in your sources. Geographically, it is traditionally associated with the Kidron Valley, located right between Jerusalem and the Mount of Olives.
Okay.
But linguistically and theologically, the name is deeply significant. Jehoshaphat in Hebrew translates literally to Yahweh judges. The author is using the geography to reinforce the theology. The nations are being drawn to the valley of Yahweh's judgment.
And your notes connect this specific gathering in the Valley of Jehoshaphat to what later New Testament texts, particularly the book of Revelation, call the Battle of Armageddon.
Yes, that's the connection.
The textual narrative suggests the nations gather under the illusion of their own military control, but the theological framework posits that it is actually God sovereignly drawing them into the winepress of his judgment.
That is the core argument of the sources. The visible return of Christ, this day of the Lord proper, is presented as a moment of absolute, undeniable global judgment where human rebellion is finally and completely confronted.
So what does this all mean? Analyzing this analytically, we have to ask, what is the ultimate point of all this according to the texts? We have this massive period mapped out. It starts quietly like a thief. It escalates through years of tribulation.
Right.
The sky goes dark, the moon turns to blood, the global population panics, the nations gather for war in the Valley of Jehoshaphat, and then the Lord roars from Zion. But surely the overarching narrative structure isn't just about cosmic destruction. What is the theological goal of this epoch?
According to the framework in your notes, the goal is absolutely not pure destruction. The text positions this judgment as a necessary clearing out of wickedness before establishing a permanent physical dwelling place.
A clearing out.
Yes. There is a very deliberate pivot in the book of Joel. The outcome of all this judgment is depicted as ultimate restoration. If we look at Joel 3.16 and 17, immediately after the Lord roars from Zion and the heavens and earth shudder, Joel writes, "Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, dwelling in Zion, my holy mountain."
The text portrays the Lord as a refuge for his people amidst the destruction.
Precisely.
So the narrative arc moves through severe judgment in order to arrive at a state of permanent sanctuary.
The day of the Lord epoch ends with the Lord himself reigning directly from Jerusalem. In the context of the broader biblical narrative your notes trace, this is presented as the ultimate fulfillment of the ancient promises made to King David. It is the inauguration of the Messianic kingdom.
The ultimate fulfillment.
The textual promise is that the earth is restored, absolute justice is established, and the divine presence dwells physically with humanity.
What's fascinating here is how the theological framework you provided offers its readers a highly structured sense of hope. When we analyze the timeline, your sources have mapped out, moving from the unexpected hidden start, through the escalating tribulation, the undeniable cosmic signs, the visible return, and finally arriving at the restored Messianic kingdom. It radically shifts the paradigm.
It changes everything about how the original audience and modern believers are instructed to view history.
The sources present history not as a random series of chaotic accidents or geopolitical collisions, but as a progressive, highly detailed blueprint of both judgment and mercy. It answers that first core question regarding awareness. According to this textual framework, awareness isn't about predicting dates. It's about understanding the architectural blueprint of the timeline.
That's right.
The logic of the text is that if you know the end of the narrative, if you understand that the terrifying roar from Zion ultimately leads to a completely restored and just world, you don't have to succumb to the panic that characterizes the rest of the world in these texts. You can trust the author of the timeline, even when the intermediate phases look like chaos.
It provides the reader with an analytical anchor. The text suggests that God's hiddenness in certain areas, like the thief-like timing of the rapture, is an intentional mechanism to cultivate trust and perpetual readiness. Conversely, his vivid, undeniable revelations, like the blood moon and the gathering in the valley, are presented as a guaranteed down payment on his ultimate justice.
Let's summarize the main structural takeaways from your notes today, because we have synthesized a massive amount of textual data. We've established that the day of the Lord, according to these sources, is not a singular 24-hour day.
No, it's not.
It is mapped as a profound, extended epoch of time. It initiates quietly, unexpectedly, like a thief sneaking into the timeline. It escalates into a severe period of tribulation, which is eventually signaled by massive atmospheric warnings, the sun going dark, the moon turning to blood.
And it culminates with the day of the Lord proper.
Where the text describes Christ visibly intervening, roaring like a lion from Zion, executing judgment in the valley of Jehoshaphat, and ultimately inaugurating a restored world in the Messianic kingdom.
The book of Joel provides the essential structural framework, the broad architectural strokes of this entire prophetic program that later biblical authors rely upon.
Which sets up the trajectory perfectly for our final session. Next time, in Session 5, we're going to take these broad prophetic strokes from Joel and lay them directly over the text of the book of Revelation. We will analyze exactly how the final book of the Bible takes Joel's ancient framework and populates it with intricate, highly specific details about this end-time program. It's a fascinating study in how the earliest end times prophecies in the source text integrate seamlessly with the final ones.
As we close out this session on your notes, there is a final, provocative thought embedded in this material worth pondering.
Let's hear it.
We spent significant time analyzing how the extended timeline of the day of the Lord begins. The texts insisted initiates with a hidden, unexpected event, sneaking into history like a thief in the night, long before any of those grand, terrifying cosmic signs ever materialize.
Right.
Think about the psychological implications of that framework. If the ultimate world-altering timeline of divine intervention is designed to begin in the quietest, most unremarkable of moments, perhaps on a random Tuesday, during a morning commute, or while sitting at a desk, how does that conceptual framework alter the way you process the ordinary, mundane moments of your life today? If the text claims history's climax will start without a warning siren, are you living with your eyes wide open to the present moment?